War. War never changes.
Some kind of war junkie?
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Welcome to the War 102 podcast, where we explore the doctrine, theory, philosophy, and history of warfare. I'm your guide, Paul Darling, and I want to share what I learned in nearly 30 years in uniform. So let's get to learning about the most influential activity in human history, war. Welcome to episode 88, another weekly update. Now, look, this was not my intent, I swear. I was all about to do the Spanish-American War and Teddy Roosevelt, charge of San Juan Hill, and all that stuff, because it's actually really interesting how that's the moment America became an empire and Spain finally disintegrated. It's a little talked about war that had huge impact, but I can't. There's just too much going on. So I ain't even going to mess around. Let's just kick it off, all right? So first off, Venezuela. Got to talk about it. I am not going to talk about the legal aspects of it. By the time Congress could have been notified, it was over. You cannot notify Congress on an operation of that nature because Trump's political enemies cannot be counted upon to not release that information to someone who, in some cases, they are ideologically aligned with. Or, if nothing else, just leaking it to the press, which would put American forces in danger. So Trump was absolutely right to not inform Congress before the action. Now, if Congress really doesn't like what he did and feels as though it was a complete violation of the Constitution, they are free to impeach him for that action. That is what they should do. If he violated the Constitution, which would be a crime, then impeach him. Otherwise, shut up. I don't want to hear it. You can't put a $25 million bounty on a dude and then be upset when he actually gets arrested. So that's all I'm going to talk about on legality. What I really appreciate about the operation is it really highlights center of gravity. In a dictatorship, the dictator is the center of gravity at the strategic and political level. If you remember the episode on Alexander the Great, and we talked about the fall of the Achaemenid Empire and the rise of the Macedonians and the Greeks, the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander charged directly towards Darius and his bodyguard. Alexander focused on the center of gravity for the Persian forces and attacked it. This is the same thing, only much more modern. But the question is it really a dictatorship or is it an oligarchy? Because in the absence of any follow-on forces, the vice president of the country took over, and she appears to have no desire whatsoever to acquiesce to American demands. So while I'm glad to see Maduro, frankly, get arrested and removed, if for no other reason than a reminder that our military is capable of doing more than spending money and losing wars, well, that's great. But what is going to happen long-term to Venezuela? I don't have a good answer. But if you do believe that a single dictator is the source of your problem, then what better way to take them out? It is an absolute masterclass in center of gravity analysis, massing of forces, and not screwing around at the tactical and operational level if you can execute at the strategic level, which is exactly what we did. Fantastic operation. However, is that truly the center of gravity for Venezuela? I don't know the answer. And we will see in the coming weeks and months how Venezuela swerves one way or the other. I will also note that it's kind of funny that Maduro's bodyguards were all Cubans who got smoked. So I don't want to hear about foreign occupation when it was Cuban bodyguards who were protecting the Venezuelan dictator. So smoking some commies, I'm a little bit jealous. That's what I signed up to do. Good on you, boys. All right, moving on. Israel is trolling. This will be a pretty short one. I'm not even going to talk about Gaza, although, as we can tell, as long as Hamas is there, there is no peace. There's only a ceasefire, which is benefiting no one but Hamas. But Israel decided to recognize Somaliland. So what is Somaliland? It's a land. It's filled with Somalis. I know, crazy. But it is broken off from what we think of Somali proper. And Somaliland and Somalia both occupy key terrain in the Horn of Africa, which covers the approach from the Indian Ocean into the Red Sea, which then leads into the Suez Canal. So Somaliland broke off in 1991 when Somalia fell into absolute chaos. That was a few years before the United States went into Mogadishu. If you remember the movie Black Hawk Down, we went in support of, ironically, Ilhan Omar's family ties, one of the ruling clans, and we lost, a little over a dozen Rangers Delta operators and 1/60th crew members. And then we left. And Somalia has been in chaos ever since. Now, Somaliland broke off. They have their own government, their own police force, and they de facto control that territory. But it is not recognized by other countries. Well, if you guys remember, a whole bunch of countries decided they wanted to recognize Palestine as an independent state, which they are free to do as sovereign nations. Well, Israel decided to recognize Somaliland as a sovereign state. They are free to do that as well. Now, what does this mean? Well, one, it means that Somaliland has access to Israeli arms, and Israeli makes good weapons. So this is going to completely strengthen Somaliland. The second thing that it does, it gives Israel access to the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea without having to go through the Straits of Tiran, which we discussed previously, and how key that is, and it's controlled by Egypt. So Israel has a fleet of submarines, which are believed to be nuclear equipped, probably with nuclear cruise missiles. Now they can refit and rearm and go into port in Somaliland. They don't have to go through the Straits of Tiran, where they're probably picked up and monitored. They have direct access now to the Red Sea, assuming that Somaliland lets them do that. I suspect in the near future, Israel will flood in with money to engineer port facilities for their submarines, their Navy. That'll give them more access to the Indian Ocean, to the Red Sea, and if they're allowed to go through the Straits of Hormuz into the Persian Gulf or Arabian Sea, depending on which way you swing. Mostly, I think what it is just a giant troll. You want to recognize Palestine? Fine. We're going to recognize Somaliland. And there's not jack you can do about it. And there isn't. So I had to get a chuckle off of that. That's all I'm going to talk about Israel today. But didn't go notice because there is so much going on. But it's really just a strong piece of trolling there from Netanyahu. All right. Minnesota. Yeah. So ICE agent smokes a protester from Colorado with, I think, Missouri plates. Anyways, don't really care. Not going to get into the politics of that. But what I find interesting is that Waltz, the governor, and a former National Guardsman, albeit not a Minnesota Guardsman, I don't think. I think he was Nebraska. Anyways, he is threatening to call up the National Guard to stop federal law enforcement from conducting their operations, which violates the Constitution's Supremacy Clause. Now, we're going to get into a little bit of the weird legalities. If you've listened to previous episodes, I'm kind of a fan of the militia being separate from the federal government and serving as a bulwark against federal tyranny. So, while I believe Waltz is actually breaking the law by doing it, I think he kind of gets into the spirit of Hamilton 29, Madison number 46. When I say Hamilton 29, I'm talking about the Federalist Papers, which are well worth the read. James Madison in 46, he says openly, state militias and the people's attachment to their state governments, would outweigh federal military power in a conflict of loyalty. The presumption of the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists in creating the militia is that loyalty to the state would always overrule loyalty to the federal government. Waltz might be putting that to the test, and I don't know how well it's going to go. So one of the things that annoyed me as a National Guard officer who had previously been active duty is National Guard officers take a very different oath of office than regular Army officers. So, for example, National Guard officer gives the following oath. I do solemnly swear or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the state of whatever state you're in, against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I'll bear true faith and allegiance to the same, that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and of the governor of the state of whatever state you're in. The National Guard officer states explicitly that they will obey the orders of the President of the United States and of the governor of the state of whatever state you're from. So what happens when those conflict? Well, by the Supremacy Clause, the orders of the president outweigh the orders of the governor. Now, compare and contrast that with the Title 10 Active Duty Forces Oath of Allegiance for an officer. I do solemnly swear that I'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestics, bear true faith and allegiance to the same. I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Nothing about obeying the orders of the president. which is good, actually, because when you say you'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States, it says explicitly in the Constitution that the president is the commander in chief of the armed forces. Implicit in the oath and the swearing allegiance to the Constitution is you will obey all legal orders from the president. It's implied in the oath for a regular Army officer. It is explicit in the oath for a National Guard officer. So Tim Walz goes over to his National Guard and tells them, you will stop federal officers from arresting Somalis, illegal immigrants, or whomever, people who are being removed, or the president has said to be removed. And the president of the United States says, no, you're not going to stop federal forces. In fact, if you do so, I will call you up in Title 10 and court-martial you, which would be absolutely legal. So Walz is kicking off an interesting test yet again of the National Guard and its role in the United States. Trump has caused a bunch of these, and I've disagreed with Trump on most of them. If you've listened to previous episodes, I don't think that the National Guard should be called up against its will in a Title 10 status to perform law enforcement actions because that violates posse comitatus. But this is a different piece. For Walz to claim that he's going to call up the National Guard to thwart the federal government from executing lawful orders, it's almost like the Democrats have this fetish about, fighting federal forces to retain imported African labor. I don't know. It's just weird. Okay, finally, another thing on Trump. I'm not sure where I stand on this one. I kind of lead towards Trump on this one, but I can see the argument the other way. Trump has threatened to directly restrict the pay for defense contracting CEOs. And his argument is they are using the profits that they get from the federal government, and they're using it to make themselves richer and not using it to invest in future infrastructure. And they're also not delivering the equipment that they've said they would in the timeline that they are. And instead of fixing the problems, they're just making themselves richer. This is absolutely happening. And people are like, well, now you're interfering. It's my free market. And I thought, well, this is capitalism. Well, no, it's not. I mean, these are federal contracts taking federal dollars, and they're making themselves very wealthy while not delivering what they said they would. And the squishy part is not investing in future infrastructure. You're making mad profits. You need to help develop the industrial base that allows us to maintain our quantitative and qualitative edge in military equipment. So I'm going to give you a quick vignette because we talked about it previously. You remember the Columbia-class submarine, which is supposed to replace the Ohio class, and that the General Dynamics Electric Boat Division cannot build them. They are completely incapable of building the submarine, and it's been sitting there for years going nowhere. Well, the CEO of General Dynamics, who is a former CIA agent, you got to love that. Well, she has $271 million worth of General Dynamics stock. The vast majority of her compensation as a CEO comes in the form of stocks and options. Well, she spent tens of millions of dollars in doing a stock buyback, which increased the stock price about 35% in 1 year. So her net worth went up 35% because she made the decision by herself to do a stock buyback. She didn't invest in more engineers or more welders or anyone to fix the Columbia. She took that money, she did a stock buyback, which she's perfectly entitled to do, and made herself rich. So that's just one example. And this happens across the board. Raytheon, I don't care who they are. They are making huge amounts of money, and they're doing stock buybacks. Their compensation is $10, $20, $30 million a year, and they're not delivering the goods they promised to do. And they're totally doing this on the back of the taxpayers. I think there needs to be accountability. I don't know what a better mechanism would be. Trump is looking for a solution to something that is a real problem. I don't know if his solution is the right one, but it does need to be addressed. These guys need to be thinking about the future. We're building tanks in the same plant that we have for 60 years. We're building rockets and jets in places that are out of date. They can't compete with modern technology, and we're not investing in our infrastructure for the future. I remember I went to Watervliet decades ago. It was ancient then, and we're still building stuff there, and I bet it doesn't look any better. We need to invest in the future of our industrial base, and doing stock buybacks and giving hundreds of millions of dollars to the CEOs of these companies who are failing to perform as they should is not
the best use of taxpayers' money. So I get what Trump's trying to do. I don't know if it's the right way to do it. I'm not a genius in that. But anytime we can stick it to a defense contractor who's not delivering what they should, that's what we need to do. So next week, assuming something crazy doesn't happen, I will get to the Spanish-American War because it's really interesting and I really want to share it with you guys. So that's it. Another weekly update. My apologies. I promised I wouldn't do this again, but I had to. Too much stuff going on. I'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks for listening today. If you want to help the show, please share today's episode on any social media sites you can. Check out the War 102 Buzzsprout website for more information and to send me a message. And, of course, my thanks to the subscribers who help keep the show going. Hope you all join me next week. See you soon.